大家好啊，欢迎来到大佬透镜在 YouTube 的频道，我们用一张 PPT 讲透大佬的深度分析。
今天我们来聊一聊关于中国现在是不是处于资产负债表衰退这个阶段啊，以及如果真的出现了这样的情况，中国应该采取什么样的宏观政策来应对，包括我们可以从日本的经验和教训当中学习到一些什么东西。
没错，这个话题确实是现在非常受关注的一个话题。
对，
那我们就开始吧。
我们先来说说资产负债表衰退理论的起源，就是这个理论到底是在一个什么样的背景下提出来的。
这个理论是在96年到97年之间，日本的房地产泡沫破裂了7年之后，当时虽然利率已经降到了0，但是企业还是在不断的主动的去还债，而且也不愿意去借贷来进行扩张，这个是完全不符合传统经济学的认知的。所以辜朝明他就提出了资产负债表衰退这样一个全新的概念。
所以说资产负债表衰退到底是怎么一步一步发生的，每个阶段又有哪些关键的特征呢？
其实它最开始的时候是在资产价格不断的上涨时，居民和企业都拼命的去借钱来买资产，特别是日本，当时大家都在疯狂的去囤积商业地产，
听起来就像大家都在追涨啊，杠杆越积越高。
但一旦这个泡沫破裂，比如说日本当时全国的商业地产价格最多跌了 87%， 那这个时候企业和家庭就会发现自己的资产大幅缩水，甚至很多都是资不抵债，但是他的债务还在那儿一分没少。
对，
所以他就只能把自己所有的经营活动的现金流都拿出来去还债，他就没有钱再去投资或者消费了。
所以大家都在拼命的存钱还钱，反而让经济陷入了一个死循环。
没错，这就是所谓的合成谬误，大家都在同时的去存钱去还债，就导致银行里面的钱没有人借出去，然后整个社会的消费和收入不断的循环下降。日本当时花了将近20年的时间才把自己的资产负债表修复过来。
资产负债表衰退和我们传统说的流动性陷阱到底有什么本质的区别？
其实流动性陷阱它指的是大家只是暂时的不愿意去投资，那这个时候只要利率降得够低够长的时间，是可以把需求刺激起来的。但是资产负债表衰退它的本质问题是因为大家要还债，要修复自己的资产负债表，所以你再怎么降利率，它都没有办法让企业和家庭去借钱去花。所以这就是为什么欧美日这么多年一直都没有办法把通胀拉起来的原因吗？ 就是因为他们的私人部门一直在持续的还债，那这个时候无论央行怎么去宽松，它都没有办法改变这个通缩的大趋势，所以这就是为什么货币政策在这个时候是完全失效的。
那在资产负债表衰退的时候，政府和央行到底应该怎么做才能真的帮到这个经济？
这个时候央行作为最后贷款人，它肯定是要保证这个市场上有足够的流动性，但是真正能够把这个经济拉出来的是政府必须要作为最后借款人。就是当私人部门都在拼命的存钱削减自己的支出的时候，政府必须要大胆的去扩大财政赤字，主动的去借钱去花，把这个需求的缺口补上，才能够阻止这个通缩的循环继续下去。
这么说的话，财政刺激在这个时候真的是关键。
是的，日本就是一个非常典型的例子，它的政府债务占 GDP 的比重已经超过了 200%， 但是因为它的私人部门还在持续的还债，所以它的财政扩张并没有把民间的投资挤掉，也没有引起利率的大幅上升或者是债务危机。
了解了。那我们下面这个话题其实是大家非常关心的一个话题，就是中国的房地产市场下行到底会不会让中国陷入资产负债表衰退？这两位专家他们在这方面的判断有什么核心的分歧和共识呢？
其实他们两位在这方面的判断还是存在比较大的分歧的。辜朝明他的判断是比较谨慎悲观的，他认为中国现在已经出现了资产负债表衰退的早期的预警信号，比如说居民在大量的提前还房贷，然后房企也在主动的去杠杆，包括居民的中长期贷款持续的在走弱。对，就算你把利率降到很低，大家也还是不愿意去借钱。那他认为这个根源就在于房地产的上涨的预期已经彻底的逆转了，那大家现在就是怕自己的资产缩水，所以都在拼命的去还债。那如果这个情况再持续下去的话，中国就会正式的进入资产负债表衰退。
他这个判断听起来确实让人有点紧张。
对，不过他也说了，他说因为中国的资金流量表的数据是非常滞后的，所以他说他现在还没有办法100%的下结论，但是他认为风险是非常高的。而于永定的看法是，中国现在还没有进入资产负债表衰退，他认为中国现在只是风险前置了。那他认为中国的这个低通胀和经济增速的放缓，不仅仅是因为私人部门在还债，更多的是因为中国长期的产能过剩以及投资结构的失衡。
看来他们在怎么去看待这个风险上面还是有挺大的差异的。
对，但是他们都有一个共识，就是房地产和债务这一块的风险是中国现在最突出的问题。就如果说房企的这个高负债和期房的制度引发了大规模的债务违约，那这不仅仅会让居民的资产受损，也会让银行的资产质量受到巨大的冲击，然后地方政府的财政也会因为土地出让收入的下滑而变得更加的紧张，它就更难去托底这个经济。那如果这个债务问题不控制住的话，就有可能会让中国重蹈日本的覆辙，就是陷入一个长期的经济低迷。
没错，顺着这个思路，咱们来谈谈中国经济的现状和长期的痛点。中国现在在通缩压力和产能过剩这两个方面到底面临着哪些比较突出的问题？
中国在过去的10年里面，其实有7年的时间 PPI 都是负的，然后 CPI 也是自12年以后就一直都在 3% 以下，多数时间都是在 2% 左右徘徊。 那中国的经济增速也是从 12.2% 逐步的回落到疫情前的 6% 左右。所以中国现在其实面临着一个非常明显的长期的通缩压力。
这么看来，无论是物价还是经济增速，都是呈现一个下行的趋势。
是的，那产能过剩其实也有两种情况，一种就是有些行业它就是因为市场自发的投资过热，比如说一些传统的工业，还有就是新能源汽车，那这种其实可以让市场自己去出清，不需要政府再去刺激。但另外一种就是因为过去的货币和财政刺激政策带来的过剩产能，那这个就必须要靠宏观政策的反向扩张去对冲这个需求的不足。
我想知道有什么具体的政策建议可以帮助中国来摆脱这个通缩的压力和产能过剩的困境。
建议央行可以设立一个比较清晰的通胀的目标，比如说 3% 左右，然后当实际的通胀持续的低于这个目标的时候，就果断的去采取宽松的货币政策和积极的财政政策，而且不要太害怕房价会短期的反弹。
那面对地产的风险和这个防衰退的压力，两位专家在应对的政策组合上面有哪些统一的看法？
他们都认为在这个阶段，货币政策虽然可以配合着去做一些适度的宽松，但是主要还是得靠财政政策发力，因为你这个时候单纯的去降息降准效果是非常有限的，只有财政政策才能够真正的起到一个刺激的作用。
所以财政政策是被摆在了一个最优先的位置。
没错，而且他们特别强调不能再死守着 3% 的赤字率和 60% 的债务率的红线，而是要根据国内的需求缺口来动态的去增加财政支出。那支出的方向呢，主要就是3个。第一个是要去化解房地产企业的债务，要全力的去保交楼，这样才能够稳住居民的资产和信心。第二个是要去支撑房地产和基建产业链，保障就业和居民的收入。第三个是要帮助地方政府缓解土地财政的压力，去防范和化解地方的债务风险。
具体来说，在推行这些政策的时候，有哪些原则是必须要遵守的？
有3条非常重要的原则。第一个是速度要快，第二个是力度要足，第三个是要持续出手。就是你不能说今天给一点，明天给一点，那是没有办法逆转这个通缩的趋势的。你必须要大规模的连续的去推出财政刺激。
所以顺序也很关键，就是你不能在大家还没有恢复信心的时候就急着去推那些比较难的改革，
就是要先用总需求的扩张把企业和居民的信心稳住，等到信贷和消费都开始复苏了之后，你才可以去推那些结构性的改革，比如说产业政策、土地政策、社保政策的改革。不然的话，只会让大家更不敢投资，更不敢消费，那就会让经济雪上加霜。
确实是这样。那欧美在应对资产负债表衰退的时候，他们都做了哪些选择，又给我们带来了哪些启示呢？
欧元区其实是一个反面的例子，就像西班牙和爱尔兰，当时他们的私人部门储蓄率一度高达 GDP 的 7%到8%，就大家都在拼命的还债，修复自己的资产负债表。那其实这个时候是需要政府大力的去扩大财政赤字来托底的，但是欧盟一直都死守着财政赤字不能超过 3% 的这条红线，就导致政府没有办法借足够的钱去补上这个民间的储蓄缺口，所以就导致需求一直都不足，通缩的压力也一直都很大，失业率也一直都下不来。
听起来就是财政政策的缺位让他们的经济雪上加霜。
是的，而且欧洲就是一直都在强调要搞结构改革，但是他始终没有在短期去用财政政策去稳住这个经济，所以他就陷入了长期的经济低迷。那美国的话就正好相反，08年金融危机之后，奥巴马政府很快的就推出了持续的财政刺激，所以就避免了所谓的财政悬崖，然后美国的复苏也远远快于欧洲和日本。就这其实就是说明了财政政策在关键的时候是可以起到决定性的作用的。
确实，那我们再来说说日美贸易摩擦以及日本在老龄化和汇率政策上面的一些经验教训。日本当年到底犯了哪些错？这些错对中国有什么样的启发？
日本当年最大的问题就是国内的市场开放度不够，它对美的进口壁垒一直都很高，所以就导致它常年都是一个巨额的贸易顺差，然后也让日元不断的升值，从120多日元兑1美元一直升到80日元兑1美元。就这种大幅的升值，就直接逼得日本的制造业不得不大规模的外迁，然后国内的产业也出现了空心化。
这么看的话，汇率的剧烈波动确实会给一个国家的产业带来非常大的冲击。
没错，而且日本当时还一味的去重视半导体这种高端产业，然后忽略了汽车这种就业大户，再加上它的汇率政策几乎没有什么弹性，就只能眼睁睁的看着自己被外部的冲击一次又一次的重创。那中国其实可以学到的就是一定要保持汇率的弹性，让人民币可以合理的波动，然后不要去过度的依赖外贸，要去不断的扩大内需，降低资本外流的风险，同时还要主动的去扩大进口，去推动贸易的平衡，进一步的去开放国内的市场，包括可以逐步的去减少美债的储备，用增加进口的方式去消耗掉这些外汇资产。
那我们最后来总结一下，两位专家对于中国要避免重蹈日本的覆辙，他们提出了哪些具体的行动方案？
他们其实是提出了3条关键的举措。第一个就是财政政策和货币政策要双管齐下，而且政府要主动的去扮演最后借款人的角色。第二个是要集中力量去解决房地产开发商的债务问题， 然后要全力的去推进保交楼，这样才能够稳住居民对于自己资产的信心。第三个是要妥善的去化解地方政府的土地财政和债务风险，要留足政策的空间，不要让风险蔓延。
听起来就是每一步都得走得很小心，不然的话就很容易错失时机。
对，他们特别警告说，如果说财政政策继续收紧，然后房地产的风险进一步的扩散的话，中国很有可能会陷入像日本那样的长达10多年的债务修复期，那中国的经济增长也会持续的受到压制。
OK， 我们今天聊了很多关于资产负债表衰退的理论，然后也聊了很多关于中国和日本的经验教训，最后也聊了很多关于财政政策和货币政策在这种特殊时期的作用，希望大家能够从中得到一些启发。好了，
那我们这期节目就到这里了，感谢大家的收听，后面是完整版，请有空的朋友继续。这里是 YouTube 大佬透镜，我们致力于过滤垃圾信息，挖掘优质内容，请大家订阅、点赞、评论，这样算法下次就会第一时间把我们的更新直接推送到您的屏幕上，您就不用再费劲去打字去搜索了。
And Mr. Yu Yongding, Chairman, Pushan Foundation and Academician, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences.
Maybe briefly introducing both our panelists. Mr. Richard Koo, he is best known in China as Mr. Balance Sheet. He coined the term balance sheet recession. Some people think we are kind of in a situation comparing to Japan 20 or 30 years ago. So, Mr. Koo, thank you for being here with us. I believe you are one of the most sought after economists in China today. And then Professor Yu is one of the most vocal economists in China. In recent years, he has been consistently calling for coordinated monetary and fiscal spending stimulus in recent years. Also, he studied Japan for a long time. He has known Japan, many of the policy makers. I believe the two of you will bring to our audience a great session. Now, let's begin. Mr. Koo,
yes.
Tell us how you come up with the word balance sheet recession. What's the apple fall on your head? You know, like Isaac Newton, you come out with this idea. And is China in balance recession?
Well, thank you very much for having me on this very important forum. I came up with the concept of balance sheet recession around 1996, 1997, so 7 years after the bursting of the Japanese bubble, when I looked at how much money Japanese companies are actually procuring from the capital market and the banking system. It turns out that they are not procuring money, they were actually paying down debt. At that time, Japanese interest rates are already at 0. We were never taught in our business schools or economics classes that companies should pay down debt when interest rates are 0. So that started me into this thinking. Under what circumstances would you pay down debt when interest rates are 0? The only possibility is that they have financial problems, balance sheet problems. And that's how this whole thinking started. And the balance sheet recession operates in the following way. During the bubble, people tend to borrow lots of money so that they can make more money. They leverage themselves up. When the bubble bursts, asset prices collapse, but the liabilities remain. So their balance sheet is underwater. Balance sheets underwater means you're bankrupt, basically. But there are actually two kinds of bankruptcies. If your cash flow is still good, then you can use your cash flow to pay down debt. If there's no cash flow, that's the end of your business. You just have to liquidate yourself. In the Japanese case, back in 1990, Japan was still running huge trade surpluses with so many countries around the world. Everybody wanted to buy Japanese cars, Japanese cameras. So cash flow was there, but the balance sheets were deeply underwater. Japanese commercial real estate prices fell 87% nationwide. Not just little corner of Tokyo, the entire country. So the balance sheets are deeply underwater, but their cash flow was still there. So everybody start using their cash flow to pay down debt. That way, you don't have to tell your shareholders, sorry, it's all piece of paper. You don't have to tell your bankers, it's all non-performing loans. You don't have to tell your workers, you have no more jobs tomorrow. So for all the stakeholders involved, that's the right thing to do and responsible thing to do, to use cash flow to pay down debt. The problem is, when everybody does this all at the same time, what happens to the national economy? In the national economy, if someone is saving money or paying down debt, someone else has to be borrowing and spending the money. And in the usual economy, it's people like us in the financial sector taking money from the borrowers, giving to someone who can use it, taking money from the savers, given to someone who can use it, and the economy moves forward. And if there are too many borrowers, interest rates are raised by the central bank. Too few borrowers, interest rates are lowered to make sure that this cycle is maintained. But when everyone is repairing balance sheets all at the same time, you bring interest rates down to zero, nothing happens. Everybody's still paying down debt. Then you get into a big deflationary problem, because if I have $1,000 of income and I spend $900 myself, $900 is already someone else's income, so that's not a problem. But the $100 that I decide to save will go through people like us in the financial sector, and this is lent to someone else. That person borrows and spends $100. Then the $900 I spent plus $100 that this person spent, together $1,000, and economy moves forward. Too many borrowers, rates are raised. Too few borrowers, rates are lowered. That's the usual world. That's the textbook world. But in a balance sheet recession, I have $1,000 of income. I spend $900 myself. That $900 is okay. It's already in the market economy. But the $100 that I saved gets stuck in a financial system. It cannot go out because there are no borrowers. So economy shrinks from $1,000 to $900. The $900 is someone else's income. If that person says, okay, let's save 10%, decide to save $810, decide to save $90, that $90 gets stuck in the banking system again because it takes a long time to repair balance sheets. In the Japanese case, it took nearly 20 years to repair balance sheets. So economy can go.
How is this situation different from the classic liquidity trap?
Liquidity trap is a description, not an explanation. I think balance sheet recession is the explanation for liquidity trap. And the economy goes from 1,900, 810, 730 very, very quickly. That's basically what happened in United States after the Great Depression. Once the Great Depression happened, United States lost 46% of its nominal GDP in just 4 years because of this process, 1,900, 810, 730. So when you are in that situation, central bank, I'm afraid, is largely powerless. As a former central banker myself, I hate to say this, but when there are no borrowers, everybody's repairing balance sheets. Monetary policy, I'm afraid, is largely ineffective. And we just listened to that previous session where central banks are doing too much and this and that. I was a little disappointed that none of them explained why they failed to reach the inflation target. The key reason why they failed to reach the inflation target, in spite of all the policies that they put in, is because United States, Europe, Japan were all facing balance sheet problems, balance sheet recession. So in the balance sheet recession, government has to borrow the money to keep the economy going. Government has to be the borrower of last resort. Central bank is good in being a lender of last resort, but in the balance sheet recession, government has to become the borrower of last resort. And Japan managed to do that. They didn't do a very good job of it, but at the end of the day, they managed to keep the economy going.
I can infer from what you said that you think China is also in balance recession? Because we have inflation below target as well.
Yes. Unfortunately, to understand whether we're in balance sheet recession or not, we really need this data called flow of funds. Who is saving, who is borrowing? And the Chinese flow of funds data comes very late. And so we don't have that data in front of us like we had in Japan at the time. But I hear that a lot of people are now paying down debt or refuse to borrow money, even with these very low interest rates. And then but they're still saving money, then you get into a situation like balance sheet recession.
So, Professor Yu, do you agree? I know you had a similar prescription as Mr. Ku, more fiscal spending, more monetary stimulus. But do you agree with the diagnosis that we are likely in a balance sheet recession? Please.
I think so far you cannot say that China is suffering from a balance sheet recession. Perhaps we haven't reached that stage yet. My view is that after global financial crisis, initially Chinese government used a very expansionary fiscal and monetary policy to stimulate the economy, so that Chinese economy rebounded very strongly. And in the first quarter of 2010, the growth rate of our Chinese economy was 12.2%, extremely high. At the time, we also found that there are lots of side effects of this stimulus package. So the government feel that we should make some adjustment. But I think we make a mistake during this adjustment process. On the whole, it's correct. Yes, there are some excess we should reduce. But I think we overdone that. For example, in 2009, China's budget deficit to GDP ratio was 2.8%. Then in 2010, it became 1.1%. Then you compare with the other countries, they continue to use expansionary fiscal monetary policy to stimulate the economy. I think Chinese government was too cautious. And also Chinese government stick to those Maastricht standards. Number one, budget debt to GDP ratio should be lower than 3%. Government bond to GDP ratio should be lower than 60%. And so they try their best to make a correction and so on and so forth. I think this has some negative impact on the Chinese economy. And we should also realize one fact. Since March 2012, China's PPI entered into negative territory for 54 months in a row. Then again, in 2019, China's PPI again entered into negative territory for some 10 months. Then again, last October, China's PPI again negative. So if we did simple calculation over the past 10 years, there are 7 years China's PPI was in negative territory. Okay, then PPI starting from May of 2012, China's CPI was less than 3%. Since then, it has been kept very low, something like 2%. But at the same time, China's growth rate has been slowing down steadily, almost quarterly, from 12.2 and to the 2019 quarter 4, 6%. Let's forget the COVID temporary. Okay, we don't mention that. So you can see, on the one hand, the growth rate has been falling. On the other hand, we can see very low inflation. So according to the textbook, it's very natural. The Chinese government should use expansionary fiscal monetary policy to try to get a higher growth rate for GDP. But we failed to do so. Why? There's one very important disturbance. Because China, from time to time, the housing price has been rising. So whenever there's housing price rising, then the government apply the brake, try to stop this. And of course, it's monetary tightening, so on and so forth. I have a doubt whether People's Bank of China should target housing prices because it's asset price. In my view, for People's Bank of China, there are too many balls they have to juggling. It's too difficult. We don't have an inflation target, but from time to time, government will mention this year we should achieve inflation rate something like 3%, no more. but there's no target. But this, I think, perhaps is, I think, in people's mind, China's inflation rate should not be higher than 3%. I think Chinese government should really forget about these Maastricht standards to be more realistic. And China maybe should put more emphasis in the importance of inflation target. For example, for China, 3% maybe is okay. Then if they lower 3%, lower than 3%, then use expansionary fiscal and monetary policy. So this is our problem.
I actually want to intervene here. Professor Yu, you said we have persistent low inflation. Yeah. It's mainly because we have less demand. Is that the possibility? Low inflation is because we have too much capacity, we had excess supply, and then is that linked to the particular way we stimulate our economy? Because we always do investment. Okay. This period investment is demand, next period investment is supply.
Okay, this is a very good question because sometimes we confuse the different nature of excess supply. Sometimes there's excess supply. This is due to structural problem. Enterprise invest too much, and then, for example, in steel industry, in sometimes maybe in the future in car industry, so on. But this is structural. But on the other hand, we also have excessive capacity caused by tight monetary and fiscal policy. For example, in 2012, and because monetary tightening in 2011, so in 2012. Capacity in steel industry increased. So the profitability is very low. So you should make distinction. And if the excess capacity is caused by excess investment due to some misinvestment, wrong judgment, then this should be corrected by market, by price mechanism, not by macroeconomic policy. If this is caused by monetary policy, fiscal policy, then you should reverse your macroeconomic policy.
All right. So come back to you, Mr. Ku. In 1990s, when Professor Yu studied Japan close, you think at that time Japan said, the debt to GDP ratio is 90%.
Right.
The Japanese people believe it's too high. And what made the change to finally, to decide the government must leverage up? Now today we know JGB, Japanese government debt is more than 200%. What's made the change, and should China learn from it?
Well, when the private sector is willing to borrow money, the government should not be borrowing money. And that's the textbook world that we learned. When the private sector is willing to borrow money, and if the government tries to come in, you cause all sorts of problems, misallocation of resources, inflation, higher interest rates, and all of that. But if the private sector is repairing balance sheets and not borrowing money, but people are still saving money, and if the government did not come in and borrow, the economy will fall into the 1,900, 810, 700 process. And so it all depends on the situation. And in the situation that Japan found itself back in 1990, household sector companies are all saving money to repair balance sheets. And if the government did not borrow, the situation would have been catastrophic. So when they came in to borrow, many academic thinkers said, oh, but this will crowd out private sector investments, it will push interest rates higher, we're going to have fiscal crisis. Nothing like that happened.
It seems very straightforward. Then the question comes to Professor Yu. If it's that straightforward, why we're not doing it? There's no crowding out. It's just to push down the gas pedal, spend more.
Really, I don't think I can answer this question. I'm sorry. But what I'm trying to say is that at this stage, the most important thing is that the government should use expansionary fiscal and monetary policy to create a certain environment to encourage investment by enterprises, encourage consumer to spend. So without this kind of expansionary fiscal and monetary policy, without create a certain environment, then it's difficult to persuade enterprise to invest, persuade household to spend. If household have no good expectation for future income, so how can you encourage, force them to spend more? So I think these are very big challenges we are facing. And also I think the solution is quite straightforward because China is not facing sort of dilemma. On the one hand, you have to raise unemployment rate, reduce unemployment. On the other hand, you have to control inflation. China doesn't face this problem. And we don't need to care too much about the inflation. Right. So you use expansion fiscal monetary policy. I think that's not that, not that difficult.
So I want to switch topic a little bit. In drawing parallel between China and Japan, we talk about a balance sheet. At the same time, we're also talking about trade frictions between major power, also an aging society. These two are in a way linked because the aging society has.
And Japan was running such a large current account surplus that the yen had to go up higher and higher. And this was offset by Japanese insurance companies, pension trusts buying US treasuries to keep the yen from going higher. But when Americans got really upset with this huge trade imbalance and start making big noises, all these insurance companies stopped buying US treasuries. And that pushed the yen from 240 yen in 1985 all the way to 80 yen in 1995. So 10 years, the Japanese yen went from 240 to 80. And that forced the companies to go out, which I thought was very, very unfortunate. If Japan opened the market earlier and more American goods could come in, that would have kept the yen from appreciating, and that would allow the Japanese companies to stay in Japan, and that would have been better for everybody. But unfortunately, that was not done, and Japan lost lots of its good industries as a result. Now, for the Chinese situation, Chinese market, according to many Americans, a lot more open than the Japanese market, at least at that time. Now, Japanese market is very open. It's amazing how cheaply you can get goods made abroad in Japan at very low prices. But at that time, that was a big mistake by the Japanese. And the other big mistakes by the Japanese is this nationalistic notion, championed by by then the mayor of Tokyo, Mr. Ishihara, who said, Japan can say no. He wrote this book, Japan That Can Say No, and says, if Americans don't buy our semiconductors, we can sell this to the Soviets. And I was in the meeting with Mr. Ishihara one event, and I said, yes, Mr. Ishihara, you are right. Soviet Union will love to buy, Russia would love to buy Japanese semiconductors. But would Russians then buy our Toyotas and Nissans and Hondas? The Russians just don't have the money to do that. Which one is more important for Japanese employment? Semiconductors or automobiles? And it is by far the cars, not the semiconductors. And Ishihara then had to back down. So what is very important for economic growth is what market do you have for your goods? You can be able to produce fantastic products, but if there's no market for it, the economy won't grow. And that's what Japanese learned from the late 80s, early 90s.
So Mr. Ku mentioned two important lessons. The first is exchange rate flexibility. The second is you have to bear in mind who is your customer. Professor Yu, do you agree? If you apply this to China, what will you draw from Japanese lessons?
I agree. And actually, I have been arguing for a flexible RMB exchange rate for something like 20 years. Yes, and China should allow RMB to be more flexible. And I know you argue a clean floating. I dare not to go as far, but actually, I'm very sympathetic with your view. And, I think as late as 3 years ago, people in China still discussing whether we should allow RMB to break the threshold of 7%. So what is the difference between 6.9 and 7? It's meaningless. So you should not intervene. I think People's Bank of China should be praised because they take courageous action, and they, I think, adopt basically sort of a very flexible view on RMB exchange rate. I'm not saying they stop intervention whatsoever, but mostly they allow RMB to respond to market demand and supply. I think that's a very good approach. Hopefully, People's Bank of China will continue to adopt this approach. And also, we are facing problem because interest rate gap between China and the United States, capital outflow and so on. I think the most important thing is that China should have a high growth rate and have a better economic prosperity. Then the confidence will become greater and greater. Then they will stay in China. This is the most important way to reduce the capital outflows. So I don't think RMB will really fall in any dramatic way. China is still running large current account surplus and so on. So China is not some African countries. So we don't need to worry too much about exchange rate. On the other hand, I think I want to add one point. And yes, China should learn Japan's experience to make China's import-export regime more in line with the WTO requirement. Actually, already very open. China should encourage encourage imports. We put too much emphasis on exports. China needs to increase import. In order to do so, one is to have a high growth rate, okay? Then another, we should further liberalize sort of a control regime. I think that's very good for China. Another important element for me to argue for this is that we have accumulated too much U.S. government bonds, pile of bonds. I owe you. I think by increased imports, we can return this IOU in a smooth, gradual way. This is good both for China and the United States.
So, Professor Yu, essentially you are saying, if we lost market access, we should consume more domestically.
Actually, Chinese government already proposed sort of strategy, dual circulation. I think this is right. China is a bigger country, China is a high saving country, so China should rely more on domestic demand.
Mr. Ku, looking back, we seem to have drawn a lot of lessons from Japan, but Japan is just one observation point, it's one country, one example. From Japanese experience, maybe also from Great Depression experience, maybe we have two data points.
Right.
People seem to think that deflation is really the worst enemy. Now, having listened to the previous panel, you agree with that? You had a change of thought, or you already had some opinions?
I think there's one more observation point, and that's Europe. And I think Europeans, against my repeated advice, stayed with this Growth and Stability Pact, which limited government budget deficit to 3% of GDP. But the Spanish private sector, after the bursting of the Spanish housing bubble, was saving well over 7% of GDP. And Irish private sector, other private sectors in Europe was saving 7, 8%, some in a temporary way, almost 20% of GDP, because they're all repairing balance sheets as quickly as possible. But the government, so 7% private sector savings, government could only borrow 3% of it. So what happened to the remaining 4%? That's the deflation that they faced. And the Spanish unemployment rate went to 20-some%. And all the debate about so-called structural reform. I mean, I'm absolutely nothing against structural reform. I'm all for structural reform. But when the problem is with the balance sheets, you have to fix that problem first, because the economy can deteriorate very quickly while you are debating structural reforms. And I think Europeans, if they understood that this was balance sheet recession, they would have come out of that problem much, much sooner. And the other counterexample is the United States. Americans used to tell the Japanese that, oh, you have so many structural problems this, structural problems that. Americans love that kind of argument, as long as it's a structural problem of someone else, not their own. But after 2008, the economy fell into balance sheet recession. Within 1 to 2 years, all the key people in the Obama administration realized that we are in balance sheet recession. Nathan Sheets that you have was the first person in Federal Reserve who understood that this was balance sheet recession. And so they start talking about structural reform, they start talking about other things, and kept on talking about so-called fiscal cliff. We cannot afford to fall off the fiscal cliff. Remember that argument?
Yes.
So US was the epicenter of Lehman shock, global financial crisis, but it came out faster than all the other countries from that recession because US was able to keep its fiscal stimulus in place. Whereas the Europe and Japan, still struggling with all the other arguments, were not able to do full fiscal stimulus, and as a result, suffered far longer than necessary.
Yeah. So to miss the coup, we have 3 observation points: US, Japan, Europe. So everybody had it. Professor Yu, we only have 30 seconds left. You don't think we will become the first observation point? How should we avoid it? How can we avoid becoming the first balance sheet recession?
I think it's very simple. As soon as Chinese government can take action, then we can avoid it. I think there are 3 things we have to do. One, to adopt an expansionary fiscal and monetary policy. Then we need to deal with the real estate developers because there are some debt problems. Then we also need to deal with the local government debts. 3 things we need to do. The good thing is that we have enough policy space to deal with this. If we delay, then perhaps the window, the opportunity will close.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give our 2 great panelists a round of applause. Thank you.